What are the most popular JavaScript frameworks? Which JavaScript framework should you learn, or should you just concentrate on vanilla JavaScript and not bother with a framework at all? Welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about front-end JavaScript frameworks. What do employers care about, and which one, if any, should you be learning? Front-end web applications are built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and these are old technologies. The first HTML specification was made public in 1991, so that's 30 years ago, and JavaScript was created a few years later in 1995, so still very old. And when these things were first made, nobody ever envisaged using them to create complex, interactive pieces of software like you find today on the web. If you'd have shown Google Maps to Tim Berners-Lee back in 1991 and told him that this is what HTML would one day be used to create, he probably wouldn't have believed you. So no, HTML, JavaScript and CSS are not the perfect tools for creating complex, intricate user experiences on the web, but they're all that we've got. So to make using them a little bit easier, open source libraries and frameworks have been developed and that add a layer of abstraction around them. So these are JavaScript files essentially that you include in the scripts of your website, and they give you the tools to create websites much more easily than just interacting with JavaScript and the DOM directly. So take data binding, for example. One extremely common thing to do on websites is to take some data from the back end and display it in some text boxes, and then allow the users to change the text, click save, and send those new values back to the back end. Now that sounds really simple, right? But this is actually a really long-winded thing to do in JavaScript. To read the value of a text input in JavaScript, you need to find it on the page, you need to attach an event listener, do some validation, organization of the data, and then send it to the back end. And that's not to mention like cross-browser compatibility or accessibility or any of these other things that you have to manually code if you want to do it in plain JavaScript. So that's generally why we use frameworks. We say to a framework like React, here's a text input, when the user updates this input, do something with that string. React worries about inserting that element onto the page, keeping track of the event handlers, removing the event handlers when the input is no longer on the screen, and all of that complicated stuff is handled by just this one line of code that you give to React. It's nice, and it makes building user interfaces much easier and much faster. So that's why we use frameworks. But why are there so many? Well, let's have a look at the 3 most popular JavaScript frameworks when it comes to job vacancies. This is demand in the job market from last year for the 3 biggest front-end JavaScript frameworks. Vue is the smallest, but it is rising, and ultimately all 3 of these are frameworks that people are hiring engineers to build with, and they want engineers who know a bit about how they work. So let's start with React. React is the most popular JavaScript framework in the world right now. It was developed inside Facebook about 10 years ago, and it's what a lot of Facebook's actual website uses too. React is extremely popular, and honestly, if the only JavaScript library that you learn to use is React, you'll probably be okay getting a job as a front-end developer. Personally, my company Pendo doesn't use React. However, I'd happily hire a React developer because it's a transferable skill, and Pendo has enough onboarding in place to teach people Vue, which is what we use. If you have those transferable skills in React, then that's enough for me anyway. So yeah, React is a great place to start. It uses a very clean top-down model for the data flow, which can take a bit of getting used to, but once you get your head around the React way of doing things, it totally makes sense. Basically, data, objects and properties, are immutable in React, which means they don't change, and they're passed downwards through the component hierarchy to all the child components that need them. If you wanted to make a change, you fire an event at any level in this hierarchy and create a new copy of a part of the model, which then gets passed back up to the top and propagates down again with a new value set. It's really nice, and it's a really simple pattern that you see in other frameworks too, both on the front end and on the back end, because it means you're writing declarative code to respond to the current state of the data, and that's it. Anyway, that's enough about React. Let's have a look at the 2nd most popular JavaScript framework, and that's Angular. Angular was the big daddy of JavaScript frameworks for quite some time. AngularJS was released in 2010, and it became the de facto JavaScript framework for building interactive user interfaces. They kept adding features to it and improving it. However, something happened with Angular about 2015. The Angular team basically decided that there were some fundamental things wrong with the way that the framework worked. It was quite slow, especially in comparison to React, which was just taking off about that time. So the Angular team decided to completely rewrite it from the ground up. Angular version 2 was released in 2016 after a long development process, and it was completely different. There was no migration path from Angular 1 to Angular 2, and so a lot of companies decided that, hey, if we're going to have essentially adopt an entirely new framework with Angular 2, why not take a look around and see what alternatives there are? And so a lot of companies moved away from Angular at this point and adopted either React or Vue. Now, Vue was developed at Google, and it was a direct reaction to some of the issues that Angular version 1 had. It was from the start designed to be a very light work and much more performant front-end framework, but it still looks and feels a bit like AngularJS in a lot of ways. Now, Vue has been steadily gaining in popularity since its launch, and I expect a lot of the adoption for Vue has come from companies switching from AngularJS, because they are fairly similar in some key ways. For example, one big selling point, if you like, of AngularJS was that it lets you write your templates in actual HTML. So with AngularJS and also with Vue, you write HTML and you add these special attributes into the HTML to do the data binding. So that's passing data between your code and the layout. React doesn't do that. With React, the HTML is created inside JavaScript. So React has this special JSX file format that mangles JavaScript and HTML tags together, which a lot of people like, but a lot of developers who are used to AngularJS didn't really like that. So Vue preserves this HTML format for writing your templates. So those are the three big frameworks. There are others. Ember hasn't really had a look in, sorry. But if you are just learning web development, these are the three that you should be looking at. Personally, if I were to give you advice on what to start with, I would say it actually doesn't matter. Like I mentioned before, a lot of this skill is transferable. You can learn Angular and get a job in Vue.js as a Vue.js developer, and that's not out of the question. The paradigms here are the same, so I would say learn whatever you find the best learning materials for, but try to be aware of all three of these frameworks and how they differ. If I'm interviewing a front-end React developer, and bear in mind we use Vue at Pendo, then I might ask them something like, what new things do you expect to have to learn in order to transition from React to Vue? And I'd expect the candidate to have at least a basic knowledge of what those differences are. So for example, they might say, well, I'll get used to the HTML templates instead of JSX. Fine, great. So be aware of the differences and have those transferable skills. That's my advice. I've got another video up here about how you can stay up to date as a software developer, but really that's the advice I want you to leave you with. Learn one, get good at it, and then just learn about the others. So I hope this has been helpful. As always, put any questions you have in the comment section below and I will reply. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.